When day turns to night, and the moon is most bright, shed the king of you and wear the queen. The 9 realms will open and your magic be free. Hi, my bling. It's your favorite drag witch, Nova Jupiter Jenkins. My friends call me Nova JJ, and you can too. Welcome to the Super Snow Moon episode. If this is your first time here, I encourage you to listen to the previous episodes to get caught up on the sitch with this witch. In addition to the snow moon, this full moon is also known as the ice moon, as well as the hunger moon by certain First Nations. I know those of you out there in the mundane realm who currently have snow are probably tired of it and are hungry for some warmer weather. We've even had a bit of a cold snap here in the heath, thanks to this snow moon being a super moon. The moon is so supercharged that everything is freezing over faster than you can say, Tiandra min cruceleth waning. So this might be a short episode, as I can only take a break from the heat spell for so long. I've been getting a lot of questions about the identity of the person or people who sent the blood wolves to come play with me during the last full moon. I haven't quite figured it out yet, but I'm getting there. I asked Gerald and Ghoulie if they saw who it was, but unfortunately, their ghostly prison did not allow them to see their captors. I think I'll be able to trace the spell to the location it was cast from, but it's colder than a frost giant's testicle out there. I'll track them down when it warms up a bit. No, Gerald, I'm not worried that they'll attack me again when it's this cold. Oh, the recording isn't picking up your ghost voice again. I promise I didn't do anything different. I wonder why it did last time. Strange. Well, I'll do some research. We'll hear you yet. I've decided to make a new regular segment, or really to officialize something I talk about regularly into an official segment. It's Craft Corner. There are really 2 kinds of craft in which I partake, witchcraft, of course, and yarn craft, and often a combination of the 2. In this segment, I'll be talking about either one or the other, or both depending on the context. During cold winter spells like this, pun intended, is the perfect time to work on knitted projects. But sometimes your projects have other ideas. Don't get me wrong, I'm quite bundled up right now in my Mrs. Weasley sweater and scarf and hats, but I was working on this knitted armor. It's made of this magical yarn that is soft when you're knitting with it, but turns into impenetrable chainmail once it's complete. So I'm halfway through the project when I realized that if I had incorporated a yarn that was charmed to be spell resistant, the armor would be so much more useful. And of course, once an idea like that gets into your head, there's no way you can live with the inferior project that you would have ended up with if you continued. So there's nothing left to it but to engage in the frenemy of yarn crafters everywhere, frogging. Now, most people will claim that frogging is a straight-up enemy, but it does have its silver lining. For those who are not aware, frogging is the act of unraveling your work so you can go back to a certain point where you may have made a mistake, or as in my case where you want to start the project over again to incorporate a different design choice. Beginning knitters and crocheters will often work extra hard to avoid having to frog all or part of their work, but experienced yarn crafters will usually jump in and embrace that frenemy and get frogging. What are the upsides to frogging, you ask? Well, first and foremost, it can be quite cathartic, especially if you've been struggling with a piece that is just not working and you finally give up the ghost. Oh, sorry, Gerald. Unraveling that piece can feel amazing, like all your stress is draining away as the yarn is wound back into a ball. It can also be meditative. While some knitting projects are relatively mindless, in that you don't have to pay much attention to them while you're working on them, frogging is almost completely mindless, and while pulling that yarn back, you can clear your mind and get lost in the rhythm. Some witches, yours truly included, even use frogging as its own kind of magic. Specifically, if you need to undo a hex or a curse, sometimes you can incorporate the hex into a knitting project, and then when you frog it, the hex is undone. And finally, even though you have to go backwards when frogging, sometimes progress would not have been possible if you hadn't reached the point at which you had to start going back. If I hadn't gotten halfway into the armor, I might never have had the idea to incorporate spell-resistant yarn. It's like when you're trying to cross a mountain and you're following a path that ends in a cliff with nowhere to go but back. But when you look down, you see the path that you need to take that you would never have found if you hadn't made it to that cliff in the first place. So instead of thinking of it as failing and having to go back, I like to think of it as taking the scenic route. So ribbit, folks. Okay, let's jump into story time. In keeping with our cold theme, I'm going to be reading part 1 of a story called Black Amazon of Mars by Lee Douglas Brackett. It's a science fiction story from 1951. Part 1. Through all the long cold hours of the Norland night, the Martian had not moved nor spoken. At dusk of the day before, Eric John Stark had brought him into the ruined tower and laid him down, wrapped in blankets on the snow. He had built a fire of dead brush, and since then the two men had waited, alone in the vast wasteland that girdles the polar cap of Mars. Now just before dawn, Kamar the Martian spoke. "Stark." "Yes." "I am dying." "Yes." "I will not reach Kushat." "No." Kamar nodded. He was silent again. The wind howled down from the northern ice, and the broken walls rose up against it, brooding, gigantic, roofless now, but so huge and sprawling that they seemed less like walls than cliffs of ebon stone. Stark would not have gone near them but for Kamar. They were wrong somehow, with a taint of forgotten evil still about them. The big Earthman glanced at Kamar, and his face was sad. "A man likes to die in his own place," he said abruptly. "I am sorry." "The Lord of Silence is a great personage," Kamar answered. "He does not mind the meeting place. No, it was not for that I came back into the Norlands." He was shaken by an agony that was not of the body. "And I shall not reach Kushat." Stark spoke quietly, using the courtly High Martian almost as fluently as Kamar. "I have known that there was a burden heavier than death upon my brother's soul." He leaned over, placing one large hand on the Martian's shoulder. "My brother has given his life for mine. Therefore I will take his burden upon myself, if I can." He did not want Kamar's burden, whatever it might be, but the Martian had fought beside him through a long guerrilla campaign among the harried tribes of the nearer moon. He was a good man of his hands, and in the end had taken the bullet that was meant for Stark, knowing quite well what he was doing. They were friends. That was why Stark had brought Kamar into the bleak north country, trying to reach the city of his birth. The Martian was driven by some secret demon. He was afraid to die before he reached Kushat. And now he had no choice. "I have sinned, Stark. I have stolen a holy thing. You're an outlander. You would not know of Ban Cruach and the talisman that he left when he went away forever beyond the gates of death." Kamar flung aside the blankets and sat up, his voice gaining a febrile strength. "I was born and bred in the thieves' quarter under the wall. I was proud of my skill, and the talisman was a challenge. It was a treasured thing, so treasured that hardly a man has touched it since the days of Ban Cruach, who made it. And that was in the days when men still had the luster on them, before they forgot that they were gods. 'Guard well the gates of death,' he said. 'That is the city's trust. And keep the talisman always, for the day may come when you will need its strength. Who holds Kushat holds Mars, and the talisman will keep the city safe. I was a thief and proud, and I stole the talisman.' His hands went to his girdle, a belt of worn leather with a boss of battered steel, but his fingers were already numb. "Take it, Stark. Open the boss. There, on the side, where the beast's head is carved." Stark took the belt from Kamar and found the hidden spring. The rounded top of the boss came free. Inside it was something wrapped in a scrap of silk. "I had to leave Kushat," Kamar whispered. "I could never go back, but it was enough to have taken that." He watched, shaken between awe and pride and remorse, as Stark unwrapped the bit of silk. Stark had discounted most of Kamar's talk as superstition, but even so he had expected something more spectacular than the object he held in his palm. It was a lens, some 4 inches across, man-made and made with great skill, but still only a bit of crystal. Turning it about, Stark saw that it was not a simple lens, but an intricate interlocking of many facets. Incredibly complicated. Hypnotic if one looked at it too long. "What is its use?" he asked Kamar. "We are as children. We have forgotten. But there is a legend, a belief, that Ban Cruach himself made the talisman as a sign that he would not forget us, and would come back when Kushat is threatened, back through the gates of death, to teach us again the power that was his." "I do not understand," said Stark. "What are the gates of death?" Kamar answered, "It is a pass that opens into the black mountains beyond Kushat. The city stands guard before it. Why, no man remembers, except that it is a great trust." His gaze feasted on the talisman. Stark said, "You wish me to take this to Kushat?" Yes. And yet—" Kamar looked at Stark, his eyes filling suddenly with tears. "No. The North is not used to strangers. With me you might have been safe, but alone. No, Stark, you have risked too much already. Go back out of the Norlands while you can." He lay back on the blankets. Stark saw that a bluish pallor had come into the hollows of his cheeks. "Kamar," he said, and again, "Kamar." "Yes?" "Go in peace, Kamar. I will take the talisman to Kushat." The Martian sighed and smiled, and Stark was glad that he had made the promise. "The riders of Mech are wolves," said Kamar suddenly. "They hunt in these gorges. Look out for them." "I will." Stark's knowledge of the geography of this part of Mars was vague indeed, but he knew that the mountain valleys of Mech lay ahead into the north, between him and Kushat. Kamar had told him of these upland warriors. He was willing to heed the warning. Kamar had done with talking. Stark knew that he had not long to wait. The wind spoke with the voice of a great organ. The moons had set, and it was very dark outside the tower, except for the white glimmering of the snow. Stark looked up at the brooding hills and shivered. There was a smell of death already in the air. To keep from thinking, he bent closer to the fire, studying the lens. There were scratches on the bezel, as though it had been held some time in a clamp or setting, like a jewel. An ornament, probably, worn as a badge of rank. Strange ornament for a barbarian king in the dawn of Mars. The firelight made tiny dancing sparks in the endless inner facets. Quite suddenly, he had a curious feeling that the thing was alive. A pang of primitive and unreasoning fear shot through him, and he fought it down. His vision was beginning to blur, and he shut his eyes, and in the darkness it seemed to him that he could see and hear. He started up, shaken now with an eerie terror, and raised his hand to hurl the talisman away. But the part of him that had learned with much pain and effort to be civilized made him stop and think. He sat down again. An instrument of hypnosis? Possibly. And yet that fleeting touch of sight and sound had not been his own, out of his own memories. He was tempted now, fascinated, like a child that plays with fire. The talisman had been worn somehow. Where? On the breast? On the brow? He tried the first, with no result. Then he touched the flat surface of the lens to his forehead. The great tower of stone rose up monstrous to the sky. It was whole, and there were pallid lights within that stirred and flickered, and it was crowned with a shimmering darkness. He lay outside the tower, on his belly, and he was filled with fear and a great anger, and a loathing such as turns the bones to water. There was no snow. There was ice everywhere, rising to half the tower's height, sheathing the ground. Ice, cold and clear and beautiful, and deadly. He moved. He glided snake-like with infinite caution over the smooth surface. The tower was gone, and far below him was a city. He saw the temples and the palaces, the glittering, lovely city beneath him in the ice, blurred and fairy-like and strange, a dream half glimpsed through the crystal. He saw the ones that lived there, moving slowly through the streets. He could not see them clearly, only the vague shining of their bodies, and he was glad. He hated them, with a hatred that conquered even his fear, which was great indeed. He was not Eric John Stark. He was Ban Cruach. The tower and the city vanished, swept away on a reeling tide. He stood beneath a scarp of black rock notched with a single pass. The cliffs hung over him, leaning out their vast bulk as though to crush him, and the narrow mouth of the pass was full of evil laughter where the wind went by. He began to walk forward into the pass. He was quite alone. The light was dim and strange at the bottom of that cleft. Little veils of mist crept and clung between the ice and the rock, thickened, became more dense as he went farther and farther into the pass. He could not see, and the wind spoke with many tongues, piping in the crevices of the cliffs. All at once there was a shadow in the mist before him, a dim, gigantic shape that moved toward him, and he knew that he looked at death. He cried out. It was Stark who yelled in blind atavistic fear, and the echo of his own cry brought him up standing, shaking in every limb. He had dropped the talisman. It lay gleaming in the snow at his feet, and the alien memories were gone, and Kamar was dead. After a time he crouched down, breathing harshly. He did not want to touch the lens again. The part of him that had learned to fear strange gods and evil spirits with every step he took, the primitive aboriginal that lay so close under the surface of his mind, warned him to leave it, to run away, to desert this place of death and ruined stone. He forced himself to take it up. He did not look at it. He wrapped it in the bit of silk and replaced it inside the iron boss and clasped the belt around his waist. Then he found the small flask that lay with his gear beside the fire and took a long pull and tried to think rationally of the thing that had happened. Memories, not his own, but the memories of Ban Cruach, 1,000,000 years ago in the morning of a world. Memories of hate, a secret war against unhuman beings that dwelt in crystal cities cut in the living ice and used these ruined towers for some dark purpose of their own. Was that the meaning of the talisman, the power that lay within it? Had Ban Cruach, by some elder and forgotten science, imprisoned the echoes of his own mind in the crystal? Why? Perhaps as a warning? A reminder of ageless alien danger beyond the gates of death? Suddenly one of the beasts tethered outside the ruined tower started up from its sleep with a hissing snarl. Instantly Stark became motionless. They came silently on their padded feet, the rangy mountain brutes moving daintily through the sprawling ruin. Their riders too were silent, tall men with fierce eyes and russet hair, wearing leather coats and carrying each a long, straight spear. There were a score of them around the tower in the windy gloom. Stark did not bother to draw his gun. He had learned very young the difference between courage and idiocy. He walked out toward them, slowly, lest one of them be startled into spearing him, yet not slowly enough to denote fear. And he held up his right hand and gave them greeting. They did not answer him. They sat their restive mounts and stared at him, and Stark knew that Kamar had spoken the truth. These were the riders of Mech, and they were wolves. So join us next week for part 2 of the Black Amazon of Mars. I'm curious to see where this story goes. But it's now time for tarot. So, it feels like it's been forever since we've had a reading. In keeping with our snowy theme, I'm going to be using the Snowflake of Light and Darkness spread. As you may be able to guess, the cards in this spread are laid out like a snowflake that is suspended in time at the edge of a beam of light, half in one world and half in the other. Neither is inherently good or bad or better than the other. They are simply two sides of the same coin, or in this case, a snowflake. And because the snowflake is frozen in time, it allows us to take stock of where we're at, who are our helpers, and what is possible. So we're going to start with the shadow side of where we are. The card we have coming up here is Temperance. This is a card of moderation, of going within and finding balance. Still within the winter half of the year, we are as the bud waiting for the spring to blossom, and while we wait, we can find the stillness and the darkness and make room for the possibilities to come. The next card is the first of the shadow helpers. This could be another person in our lives, but in this case is more likely to be an inner side of ourselves. And it's the King of Swords to the rescue. This is a card of order, authority, and an analytical mind. So as you seek balance within, the shadow side of your higher self or higher authority is analyzing the world around you as well as the world within to find the best possible path to realizing what is possible. And the other shadow helper is the Queen of Pentacles, the Earth Mother within, who helps to keep you grounded, keeps the seed of you protected while waiting for spring. Tend to your domestic concerns that you will have strong and fertile ground from which to sprout. And the third of the shadow side cards represents what is possible. And we have the Ten of Wands. This is a card of burden, but also a card of accomplishment. So while the load may be heavy, it will be worth it in the end. Alright, let's jump to the light side of where we are. So we have here the Seven of Cups, a card of focus, organization, and restraint. So as we find balance within, we will find focus without. And the first of the light helpers is the Empress, another mother figure, but this one of fertile ideas. Let me see. Yes, the other helper card is the High Priest, a teacher who leads one to greater awareness and education. So with the fertile ideas that are tended to by the teacher, it leads us finally to the possibility of light. And here we have the Nine of Swords. This is a card of peace and tranquility. So, find balance within, focus without, and your burden will be rewarded with peace. And that's going to do it for our frosty super snow moon. Stay bundled up, and I will talk to you soon, my bling. Don't forget to tell a friend, like, comment, and subscribe on your favorite podcast app. And remember, this may be the winter of our discontent, but that doesn't mean we can't light it up and let it shine. Bye.